All right, my story. So I was born in Egypt, and my parents brought me here when I was 2. My father was a physician in Egypt, but because of the religious wars going on in Egypt that aren't new necessarily, my dad was not allowed to work as a physician. So him and my mom decided that they were going to move to the United States because they wanted me to have an opportunity if I was decide that I wanted to go to med school. They wanted to make sure that I could practice medicine. All along, ever since I was a kid, I remember being so inspired by my dad's understanding of human anatomy and physiology. And I always wanted to be a doctor. And I told him that, Dad, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a doctor. And my dad, one of my dad's core principles was always, you have to love it if you're going to be successful. So he made me follow a primary care physician, an orthopedic surgeon, a pharmacist. He really wanted to expose me to healthcare. He wanted me to see the whole picture. He also made sure that I asked these professionals about their life outside of work. He literally wanted me to envision what life would be like as these professionals. Long story short, I wasn't impressed with any of their work-life scenarios, and the orthopedic surgeon at the time was renting space out to a physical therapist of the name Todd Houghton, who owns Houghton Physical Therapy. Shout out to Todd, one of my first mentors. And I remember that day at the clinic meeting Todd and watching him work with clients, engage with people, have conversations with people, spend time with his patients and clients. I remember coming home that day and saying, Mom, Dad, I want to be a PT. And since that day, I haven't looked back. That was in high school, my junior year of high school. And so I went to UMass Lowell for exercise physiology as an undergrad. I fell in love with strength and conditioning and got certified as a personal trainer at the time, went to work at a Gold's Gym. That was my first introduction to health and fitness. And I worked under Christopher Morel, who is an unbelievable personal trainer, owns a gym in Marlboro, Massachusetts, Pinnacle Fitness. He was the first person to introduce me to this concept of functional training. And that summer, I remember just learning so much from Chris in terms of not using machines to stabilize the axial skeleton in order to produce force and leverage. And it was really interesting because I was all in the bodybuilding before and isolating the hell out of my biceps and triceps and trying to get the inner fibers of this bicep to look better in a picture. And I remember at UMass Lowell, my junior year of EP, Connor Ryan took my understanding of functional rehab to a whole new level. He was a good friend of mine all through PT school, but he was the one who introduced me to Mike Boyle and Eric Cressey and that whole arena of strength and conditioning. And having that under my belt before going to do my exercise physiology internship with Walter Norton and Jamie Damon at the Institute of Performance and Fitness in North Andover, having the previous understanding of functional training, I think really helped me just soak it all in when I was in that internship with Walter Norton. And so that led me to a summer job with Walter Norton at IPF right before going into PT school. And during PT school, I was a teaching assistant under Dr. Danielle Day, which was unbelievable. She taught me so much of the intricacies of exercise physiology and practical applications and how to study it in the lab. And it was just really fun to be able to work and learn from her, but at the same time teach exercise physiology students who are interested in it. At that time, though, I was juggling PT school, being a TA, so something had to give. So I wasn't able to do much coaching or personal training anymore, given the long commutes off campus. But at that time, fortunately for me, Connor Ryan came through big again because he introduced me to Devin McConnell, who was the new, at the time, strength coach for UML Athletics. So I volunteered under Devin McConnell, and I remember one day vividly, I was coming out of Neuro PT lab with Dr. Joanne Morarty-Barron, and I went immediately to the athletic facility to help volunteer with Devin McConnell. And I was observing Devin FMS, one of the volleyball players. And he was taking me through this explanation of mobility and stability and how you need stability on one side to express mobility on the other. And I was like, well, wait a minute, Devin. This is exactly what we were just talking about in Neuro PT lab for rehabilitating someone who just had a stroke. And that's when my mind just blew. I was like, wait a minute. Are you telling me there's a fundamental principle that applies to both neuro rehab and sports performance? And so I was like, what is this functional movement screen thing? What is this FMS thing? And Devin was like, oh, it's Gray Cook developed this system and he has this book called Movement. I was like, I have to read this book. Like, neuro equals performance. So I opened up Movement, and after the first couple chapters, I realized that everything I was studying in PT school that semester, orthopedic physical therapy, pediatric physical therapy, neurological physical therapy, Gray Cook had this brilliant way of like tying a knot around all of them and packaging it in this way that applies to orthopedics and sports medicine. And how PNF can be integrated in that industry. And man, my friends could not get me to shut up about movement and just about this common denominator. They were like, Mez, shut up, dude. Like, let's talk about something else. I was obsessed, literally. Anyways, so this was now we're going into my second year of PT school. Connor, again, comes up to me during class one day. He's like, yo, Mez, let's go to Phoenix, Arizona and take this sick course called DNS. And I was like, what, Connor? Dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. It's this awesome course. These clinicians are out of Prague. You know, Charlie Weingroff is in this system and he's constantly talking about putting people in certain positions and breathing and all this stuff. And anyways, I was like, all right, show me this stuff. He showed me. You know, at that point, Connor had already introduced me to so many awesome people in the industry. I was like, let's do it. So we did it. We went, and I remember signing in or checking into the hotel room at the time. And I turn around, and Connor's just embracing this random person, stranger for all I know, which isn't that strange for Connor. And it turns out it was Craig Levinson. You know, I had this guy's textbook, but I never thought I would meet him in person. And he was just so warm and welcoming. And man, Craig Levinson took my understanding of the sensory motor system to another level. Like, I like comparing Craig Levinson to a high-performing DJ who just mixes these sick tracks between Vladimir Yanda, Carl Levitt, Gray Cook, Eric Cressey, Stuart McGill. He just has this brilliant way of just synergizing all these different approaches and delivering it in such an inspiring way. So anyways, he really encouraged me towards the organization he was working towards was the Rehab to Performance, or the R2P Club, which was basically a Rehab to Performance club that was being integrated into physical therapy and chiropractic schools pretty much across the globe. So I was convinced to start this club at UMass Lowell. Again, the notes here to keep me on track. So me and Connor really took him up on the offer, and we decided to start that club at UMass Lowell. And that was just a great experience in and of itself. Well, backtrack back to the DNS course. I also had the privilege of meeting Claire Frank and Zach Benson. Claire Frank was an unbelievable teacher and is still an unbelievable teacher of the DNS system. And I've always looked up to her as a mentor. Zach Benson was the person who actually introduced me to the PNF residency in Vallejo, California. I remember having a conversation with him after the DNS course, and him, both of us getting really deep into PNF conversation. He was like, did you know about this residency up in Vallejo where, you know, Herman Cabot and Maggie Knott originally started PNF? And I was like, wait, what? And as soon as I got back, looked it up, applied to the residency right away, and that was the end of that. So Zach Benson also created this really interesting milestone for me throughout my journey. So at the end of PT school, I had an unbelievable clinical with Mike Roberts and Jackie Shaker at Central Mass Physical Therapy in West Boylston, Mass. And it was there that I was able to take all of the con ed, theoretical, conceptual, passionate conversations I had been having up until my last year of PT school and integrate it into the clinical setting. We're talking SFMA, DNS, PRI. Mike and Jackie were two mentors that, first of all, taught me the power of therapeutic alliance, humility, compassion, understanding, listening to patients. And they were basically a mixing pot of systems. They were the most open-minded clinicians I had met at that time. They were willing to actually integrate some of these new thought processes into a traditional orthopedic setting. And Central Mass PT for me was like the zone where I was able to take theory into practice. And it was, to say it was an amazing experience is an understatement. So that was my last year of PT school. After PT school, I went right to Vallejo, California, and did 9 months of that residency program, working with unbelievable clinicians that really helped to reshape my understanding of the functional movement, not the functional movement, but more so, let's say, the sensory motor system. I think PNF has always really been focused on the end goal, which is functional independence. And so they just really helped shape the way I think about that from a whole person perspective. PNF has always been a belief, number one, in the potential to change in neuroplasticity of the central nervous system, to the whole person, making sure that we're addressing the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual aspects of the being that we are treating. And number three, being a positive approach. So we'll get more into that later, but that was the underlying core message of PNF. And that, along with my introduction to pain science under Stephen Schmidt, who is an international educator about pain neuroscience, he actually helped show me the theoretical application of pain science towards very complex pain situations in the neurological setting, like complex regional pain syndrome, thalamic pain syndrome, and phantom limb pain. That just to see how he communicated and guided patients towards this new paradigm shift in understanding pain was just a privilege and honor. And at Vallejo, California is where I also met my beautiful wife, Samantha, who has been my rock and my backbone throughout this entire journey. So I finished the PNF program after 9 months, came back to Central Mass PT under Mike and Jackie, and it was then that I realized, man, my orthopedic skills were lacking. Like, I was trying to apply a lot of the manual PNF facilitatory movements to an orthopedic and sports med population under the SFMA model, the Selective Functional Movement Assessment. And I was just finding myself not able to combat true mobility restrictions. So that led me to apply to a residency or a fellowship under Martin Langus, the Orthopedic Manual Therapy Institute. Now, this was very much so a Freddie Kaltenborn and Olaf Evianth approach to manual therapy. But one of the biggest things I'll tell you about training under Martin, yeah, he gave me some really cool and effective simple manual therapy techniques, but more profound than that I wasn't truly expecting, was his thorough investigation and teachings in terms of intake, subjective history, and identifying what he likes to call orthopedic sensitivities, and how we can translate that into self-care management and patient management and education. I wasn't expecting that gold nugget, and that really, really transformed the way I came about doing evaluations and just overall treating people. So throughout the time at Central Mass Physical Therapy, I was going through my orthopedic manual therapy training, which was 2 years. During that time, I was also introduced to Andrea Spina's system of functional range release and functional range conditioning, which also really, really enhanced my mobility understanding and my soft tissue management understanding. So that was a huge milestone for me, not in the sense that, how can I say this? It was a milestone for me because Andrea Spina helped me see how certain principles, neurophysiological principles that I was taught in PNF, but in a whole new perspective. You know, PNF was essentially built upon treating neurological situations and children with post-polio, cerebral palsy. Andrea Spina took some of these principles that I've learned there, but he applied it to histology, to biology, to soft tissue management, and essentially ended in self-care for the patient to truly treat their own mobility restrictions and to enhance the control of their body. So I think that perspective right after PNF and in the midst of studying OMT was just a really awesome blend of perspectives that really just fit together for me really nicely under the umbrella of the SFMA. So towards the end of my OMT training, with the help of Mike Roberts and my wife Samantha, we started a cash-based practice out of an apartment in Somerville, Massachusetts, which people called me crazy for doing because I didn't open up my own clinic or space. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, and we turned one of the bedrooms into a evaluation and treatment room. And it seemed to work pretty well. Meanwhile, I was completing my coursework through the FMS and the SFMA, and most recently, I was just trained to become an instructor for the SFMA, an assistant instructor for the SFMA, maybe an instructor at some point. Now, throughout all of that journey, I was constantly asking questions to various leaders, to various different systems, and something that started to become very common throughout that was breathing, the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic interplay, if you will. And so I took a step back and I thought to myself, well, wait a minute, what system could I start getting into that really dives into that? That led me to studying ancient Eastern martial arts. I really started to look into Tai Chi and Qigong because, you know, these systems are like 4,000 years old. They're still around today. And there's neuroscience these days that are really starting to show their efficacy in both longevity and health and fitness. So I was like, you know what? Let me strap on a white belt and just throw myself into the trenches and get coached in these systems. So I joined a gym called Do in Somerville, Massachusetts, and with a really strong affinity for understanding Tai Chi, Qigong, and how these systems coach and talk about the autonomic systems, the autonomic nervous system, excuse me, how they coach and talk about breathing and recovery. And man, I've been studying these two systems now for 2.5, 3 years now. Most recently, we moved to Barrington, New Jersey with me, my wife. We moved the business down here in New Jersey, and I started training under Sifu Keith Maza. Sifu means master in Chinese. And I am so privileged and honored to be one of his students, because the lineage of knowledge that comes from this guy and the humility that he brings to teaching and the compassion he brings to his students is just unbelievable. Master Maza is a student of Grandmaster William Cheung. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Grandmaster William Cheung actually trained with Bruce Lee growing up through Hong Kong and introduced Bruce Lee to his master, which was Ip Man himself. So the lineage of knowledge that comes from Master or Sifu Maza is pretty extensive. So I'm very humbled always when I train under him, and every session is just a plethora of knowledge in a, what's really awesome, in a very simplistic yet practical standpoint. And so I just really love integrating Eastern and Western models, and Sifu Maza has really helped me do that and continues to help me do that. So the thing I want to basically get to is, I want you to realize that this book is an accumulation of my mentor's lessons towards me, if that makes any sense. This book is not just about my thoughts. Clearly, my thoughts are an amalgamation of me studying under various different brilliant therapists, coaches, and I wrote this book so that, with the ultimate goal of creating cognitive agility for myself, right? And to just free myself from the arguing and the debate, so I can just have a little more clarity. The other goal was, why can't we unite these different models? Why can't we utilize these different perspectives to promote creativity and innovation amongst ourselves so that we can better help our clients? So I hope my story allows you to get a better perspective as to how my thoughts have been developed, what systems have developed my thoughts. Thank you for your time.